Hi, welcome again back to our first segment here on today's edition of Boomer Generation Radio on WWDB AM 860 here in Greater Philadelphia. And again, we're streaming live on WWDBAM.com, and we are delighted to welcome in studio right now our first guest, Jan Collins, the founder and director of Creating Your Positive Life. Welcome, Jan. Welcome to Boomer Generation Radio. Nice to see you.
Well, thank you so much, Richard. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here, and I'm looking forward to talking with you this morning.
Well, so we have lots to talk about. Creating Your Positive Life. It sounds like something I could use right now, and along with everybody else. Talk to me about what this is. What is Creating Your Positive Life, and how in the world did you decide to do this?
Well, what Creating Your Positive Life is, it's really a way of looking at life, a way of being in life, bottom line. And I guess the best way I can describe it is looking at life that you can create what you want in your life, what you want out of your life, not be like a victim just to random circumstances. So you're actually doing things to bring about what you want.
And so you teach classes in this? I mean, this sounds like a wonderful thing, but how do you get this message across, and to whom do you deliver this message? Individuals, groups, corporations, baseball teams, which could use one?
They seem like they've taken a good turn, though.
No, let's not push it.
Well, I work with individuals, one-on-one counseling. Mm-hmm. I do classes, with groups, and I do presentations for organizations that might like to deliver that to their members. And my website is www.creatingpositive.net. And I also have been writing some articles that I would like to, share with people that have a like interest.
So what motivated you to start this? What happened in your life did you just wake up one day a couple of years ago and say, gee whiz, I think I'm going to do this? All this material, there's a motivation for why people make this transition, especially as boomers, and you're a boomer. What was the thing in your life that pushed you to creating your positive life?
Well, when I think back, one of the first things I remember was, this was probably in the 80s, I guess. I was going through some life circumstances that were stressful, and I saw a chiropractor. And what he said to me is, whatever it is you're going through, see it as coming out well. Don't keep worrying about it, about the what if this is awful, what if this happens, see it coming out well. It'll be a lot easier for your body. And I never really made the connection with how I thought and what I was focusing on with my thinking, that was going to affect my body, which could ultimately affect my health. Mm-hmm. And then there was maybe a few years later, I was taking a walk one afternoon or one evening, and there's a beautiful sunset starting to develop. And I just had this very full feeling of expansion, loving. All this beauty was just filling me. And I just had such a sense that this was like kind of natural part of me, loving, beauty. So I started putting all that together and doing workshops, taking personal growth workshops, doing reading and so forth. And I just started noticing that if I focused on negative things, like what if this happens, what if that happens, I started feeling not good, down, depressed. And if I started more actively saying to myself, one of the examples I use is when you look in the mirror, what do you say to yourself? And if you're somebody that goes, you look too old, you're too ugly, you're too fat. And I just ask people to pay attention to their body and their mood. How do you feel afterwards? And often people say they start feeling down and de-energized. And if you contrast that with looking in the mirror and saying, I really appreciate what you did yesterday. I really like your smile. And then compare that, how does that feel? And then often it's more of an uplifting and more of a relaxing feeling. So it's that type of even everyday situation. We can create what we're feeling. We can create our outlook. And then if you start expanding that to how many times during the day do you criticize yourself? I can't believe I did that again. I'm so stupid, or I never get anything right. How often do we do that during the day, that we criticize ourselves? So that's a way of creating negatively. Because we can create positive or we can create negative.
So you're teaching people, if I'm understanding, you're trying to teach people how to basically change their psycho-spiritual outlook to focus on the positive, correct?
Focus on positive, but really, bottom line for me is connecting with what I see as the core of our nature is loving.
Meaning?
That loving is our basic nature.
So
that's positive, another way of getting towards that loving.
So are you positing then that people are born, taking it back to the, from the beginning, because I know this is part of a wave of certain positive psychology and other spiritual growth type of approaches, that inherent in us is this idea that we are programmed for innately love. And would you agree with that? And that it's, I'll just stop there. That when we are born, and in our makeup inherently is an approach to love and compassion.
Yeah, I would say that's who we are at our very base core. And one of the ways I look at that is, I ask people to do an experiment. Let's say if they take 30 seconds, and you can do this yourself, when you have a minute. Take about 30 seconds and focus on somebody or something that brings up loving feelings inside you. Might be somebody now, somebody in the past. Could be a pet, place in nature, anything that brings up loving feelings. And just really focus on that for about 30 seconds. And then afterwards, if you kind of tune into your body and see how it feels. And generally people say they feel more relaxed, calmer, at peace, more open. And if you compare that with remembering how you felt when you felt anxious or angry or scared, and often the body feels tight, painful, acid stomach. So when I started noticing this, to me, I started taking the message from the body. The body is telling me that being in a positive, loving state is healthier and it's part of our nature. And research has been confirming that in the sense of if we spend a lot of times in positive feelings like gratitude, forgiveness, love, we tend to generate our own endorphins, which supports our health. If we spend a lot of time in negative feelings like resentment, anger, over a long period of time, we start generating our own stress hormones, which can start affecting our immune system. So to me, that is balancing out the idea of negative things are kind of abnormal, whereas loving is part of our nature.
So when you teach this, from what I'm hearing you say, you also are talking about this very, very close connection between mind, body, and spirit.
Absolutely.
That I know that there's a huge amount of research being done now in a variety of different locations. I know in our tradition, this is basic. It's a basic approach to medicine. This inherent linkage between the mind, the body, and the soul, that they're all interconnected. So would I be correct then when you go out and teach this is part of the workshops or the counseling that you try to teach? Would that be a correct statement?
That'd be a correct statement. That's my bottom line in all the work. Some people in counseling or in the workshops, especially in a workshop because it's a short period of time, you're focusing on changing some of the behaviors, changing some of the self-talk. What do you focus on? What are your practices? So that focus initially is on the, I don't call it superficial, but maybe the basic steps. And then if you want to go further, what I call opening to your loving self, you're starting looking at what's my relationship with myself? Do I accept all part of myself? Some people say, I hate myself when I do that. Well, if you do that often enough, you're really sending a very negative message to yourself, and you're separating yourself from a part of yourself. So there's another level that I work with people looking at that, more of a deeper relationship with yourself, because yourself is the bottom line relationship with all your other relationships.
What makes people want it to change? What are the majority of the people, let's say in your private counseling, the general age group? Are they younger? Are they over 50? Are they under 50? Or have they reached a point in their life where they're basically saying there must be something more to my life and they're searching for something deeper?
I think they come to me when they have some kind of everyday problem, everyday issue. Maybe a relationship issue or something internal, like they're anxious about something, I said an everyday issue. And then they're finding that underneath that, like in trying to resolve having this relationship problem, that the bottom line to that is really more something they're unhappy with themselves. I could say one of the easiest one is, my spouse doesn't appreciate me enough. We often find that the person's not appreciating themselves. They're criticizing themselves and they're kind of hearing it from somebody else, but the bottom line is, what are you doing to yourself? And what does that do to you? It's kind of one of my key words is, what are you doing and what is it doing to you? Mm-hmm. So it's building the awareness of what do you do during the day.
So you're focusing a lot on individual feelings. People, what they're feeling in the real world. From what I'm hearing you talk about, it's like, this is what I'm feeling. I don't understand what I'm feeling, or the feeling is making me very unhappy, if whatever that word means. And they're just basically looking, or then they're searching for the reason why they're feeling that way. Would that be a correct statement?
I think so. And what I focus on with them is, what are you doing that might be bringing that feeling on yourself? Mm-hmm. Because that's the part we can control. There's a lot of things going around us we can't control, and we need to work with all those situations as well as we can. But what are we doing to ourselves in relation to that?
Do you find a lot of people into denial? That they project things out to somebody else or some other circumstance or some other, it's the teacher, the boss, the spouse, the whatever, as opposed to not wanting to take responsibility for their own actions? I
think it's a difficult area for a lot of us, is that we experience something that feels painful outside, and I think we need to evaluate, is there something somebody's doing that is inflicting or harmful, verbally or emotionally? But what are we doing with that? Somebody could say one little comment, look at you funny, and then we try to interpret what they're saying or what they're doing. Oh, that must mean he's mad at me. That must mean he's criticizing me, when it may be nothing at all on the other person. That's our interpretation, because we're maybe criticizing ourselves, or maybe we're criticizing that person.
Mm-hmm. So we're speaking with Jan Collins of Creating Your Positive Life. We'll be back to talk about some of these counseling and workshops types of things that you deal with. I'm kind of interested in finding out what you're finding and where you take these things. We're going to be doing. But anyway, we're back with Jan Collins, the founder and director of Creating Your Positive Life. You do, as you mentioned before in the first part of the half hour, workshops, personal counseling, personal coaching. You have on the website two phrases that I just want to unpack a little bit. Integrative counseling. What is that?
Well, what I see as very important is, in counseling, it's not just working just on how you feel. It's looking at the whole aspect, bringing all parts of our life in alignment: physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, creative. It's getting all those aligned with, if we have a vision for our life, that they're all supporting that vision, that they're all, it's hard to say, connected together, because all those are connected together. So if you have a goal of, let's say, going back to college, if you're an adult going back to college, and let's say on the physical level, if you have the finances straightened out and you have the time straightened out, but there's a part of you that's feeling afraid of your ability to succeed, and you push through anyway, until you get that part settled, handle whatever that anxiety is, that you may find part of you resisting. So you're not all moving together in the same direction. And it can be a lot more difficult than it needs to be.
So one other way, perhaps, as my understanding this in a phrase, we'd use the phrase holistic.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, and try to encapsulate all aspects of the person. So in other words, you're using the concept of integrative as opposed to some other people who would be writing and teaching in this area using the concept of holistic. But it's really, from my understanding, taking an individual and saying, let's take a look at the entire universe of your experience. Mm-hmm. Would that be correct?
Yes, and it's making. Well, one of the things I found in doing the counseling work is that as I also moved into doing more of the spiritual areas, that for healing to be complete for somebody, and this is my experience and I found with some other people, that we need to do healing also on the spiritual level. If we just do the emotional and the mental and the physical, that brings about a lot of positive, healthy changes. But if we're not healing on the spiritual level, then that leaves kind of a big piece open, because at our core is our spirit, like who we are. What is it that keeps us going every day? What are our core beliefs? What are our core values? How do we see ourselves? What is our spirit? What's our passion? How do we express our spirit, our spirituality? Which to me is expressing our loving. It could be through a hobby, it could be through nature, it could be through any of those areas, but it's a way of expressing our loving. And some people do it in, prayer, meditation, relationship with the divine source. There's a lot of different ways of expressing the spirituality.
And you do this, so you also do this spiritual counseling as well, correct?
Yes.
So we've had people here on Boomer Generation Radio talking about being a spiritual director. Mm-hmm. So these are a clergy who go back and take some additional training to do spiritual direction, which basically, from what I'm understanding from my friends who do this, really take a look at what you're talking about, but they approach it from a spiritual perspective, sometimes using classic biblical text or religious text to really inform a person. So, how does that differ from what you're talking about on your website as spiritual counseling, or is it you're basically doing the same thing?
Well, I'm not clear on exactly what spiritual direction covers. I mean, I have an idea, but I don't know if that's accurate because I never really looked at the curriculum. One of the things that I've found in my own experience and with other people also is how can we experience love, which is our love or anybody else's love, or spirit or God, if we're worried about ourselves or spend a lot of time worrying, criticizing ourselves, criticizing others, holding these unforgiving positions that we might find ourselves in. How do we experience love if we're spending our time and energy in a negative feeling? So to me, being able to get to the more uplifting, more transcendent spiritual levels, we need to move ourselves out of the negativity so we can make space for that. So
are you equating spirituality and love?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. So I guess the next question is, spirituality implies some sort of deity in most people's minds. So do you then so where is that concept of God in when you do spiritual counseling? Where does the concept of God come in, or does it, or is it relatable to each individual as to how they perceive that word?
It was how they define their spirituality, and then to what extent or what level they want to pursue it. Like I said, they could be expressing it through nature, arts, or so forth, because that's expressing their core, their loving, their center. That's their expression. And some people do express it through a relationship with the divine source, and that is something that, if they want to move in that direction, I would certainly work with them in that area. And I see what's important is removing any blocks we might have. Sometimes people are mad at God, or they feel unworthy or unforgivable, and it's working with that part of relationship. Is often when people feel like they're unworthy, they're making judgments about themselves, and work with them to forgive those judgments, remove the judgments, because then I find it's easier for people to experience God's presence or God's loving. If we're just judging ourselves or judging other people, we're blocking out any positive experience because we're spending our time in a negative. So that's why it kind of all falls together with, are you creating positive or negative, and can you open yourself, change your perspective, change your everyday practices so that you're opening yourself more to your own positive loving, so then you can be open to other people's loving and, God's loving if that's, the direction you want to move.
How does that work? You created this program. How does that work for you? I mean, I'm fascinated because I'm going to be real honest with you. I find this is a challenge for me personally to look at the world, as the glass is half full. How have you managed to do this in your life? I mean, have you always been a positively oriented person, or did the motivation, as you started to talk about at the beginning of the show, that led you to creating your positive life, change the way you looked at the world?
I think my earliest experience is probably my 20s, and somebody said to me, you always focus on what you don't have. And of course I got very indignant and how could you say, blah, 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 all that. So maybe 6 months or a year later I thought about it again. And I said, let me take a look at that. And I did, and I said, they're right. I don't have this, I don't have a good car, I don't have good this, good that. So I did shift it to, I do have this and I do have that. And I just felt my whole attitude towards my everyday life, my world, changed. And the only thing that changed was the way I was looking at it. The world didn't change, but what did I focus on?
So you can teach people how to move from looking at the world negatively to looking at the world as a positive, from to paraphrase biblical text, from essence, from a curse, why don't I do this, or what's wrong with this, to a blessing.
If they're open to it, yes.
Okay, and I mean that's always the key, if they're open to it.
Right.
So we have just a couple of minutes left in this segment. Could you just, if you can, I know I'm going to put you on the spot. Could you just walk me through, a particular individual or case that really, so people who are listening to, somebody who did this, somebody who moved from this sense of why me to a sense of blessing? If that's possible.
I'm thinking of somebody I know who had developed cancer, and this is actually, I believe, a second time, and needing to go through the chemotherapy and all those different procedures. And what came out of it was like being at a cancer center with all the people waiting for chemo. And she just saw that as a way of connecting with people because they all had a shared experience. So they were starting to build it because they would see each other often. They would build like a network, a relationship. And she saw the inner qualities that were starting to develop in her, strengths she never knew she had, the resilience, teaching herself to focus on healing rather than focusing, oh no, what'll happen? Am I going to die? Am I this? It was focusing on healing. So it was teaching her how to do these practices out of necessity. So that after finishing, the treatment and so forth, and the cancer being gone essentially, is coming out of that a much stronger person with a lot more sense of being in control of her life than she had when she went into it.
So teaching a person really to use your language, to go back to this core of love that exists within every one of us. So again,
and I think so, and sometimes it gets tarnished sometimes as we grow up from experiences, or maybe we learned somebody said, "Oh, you're always a loser," and things. Oh no, the world is it can tarnish a beautiful little soul very quickly, and
clergy and therapist office are filled with people who get tarnished along the way and realize that perhaps they have to do something about it. Talking with Jan Collins, the founder and director of Creating Your Positive Life here on Boomer Generation Radio on